The train's whistle cut through the Montana afternoon like a knife through flesh, sharp and final. Evelyn pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the landscape transform from the last gasps of civilization into something rawer, meaner. Telegraph poles grew sparse. Towns became collections of wooden bones scattered across endless grass. The other passengers, miners, gamblers, a minister with whiskey on his breath, had stopped trying to make conversation with her hours ago. She preferred it that way. Her traveling trunk sat beside her, containing everything she'd been allowed to keep. 3 dresses her father deemed appropriate for frontier life, a Bible she'd never opened, her mother's silver hairbrush, and a daguerreotype of a woman whose face she barely remembered. The rest, her books, her paintings, the piano she'd played since childhood, had been sold. "Where you're going," her father had said, signing the marriage contract without looking at her, "you won't need luxuries, you'll need to make yourself useful." Useful. The word tasted like iron. The conductor's voice crackled through the car. "Stillwater! Stillwater Station!" Her stomach dropped. Through the window she could see it, a platform of warped wood, a water tower leaning like a drunk, and beyond that, a town that looked like it had been thrown together by men in a hurry to find somewhere to drink and die. Stillwater, Montana. Population 200 and something, depending on whether the mines were hiring or the winter was killing. The train lurched to a stop. Evelyn stood, smoothing her traveling dress, deep green wool, high collar, bustle, perfectly arranged. Armor, really. She'd learned young that appearance was the only weapon women were allowed to carry openly. "Ma'am?" The conductor offered his hand. "Careful now, platform's uneven." She took it, descended, and immediately understood what uneven meant in frontier terms. The boards beneath her boots were split, splintered, some missing entirely. The air smelled like coal smoke, animal dung, and something else, something wild and untamed that made her lungs work differently. "Mrs. Madigan?" She turned. The man standing 10 feet away wasn't what she'd expected. Her father had described Colt Madigan in transactional terms. 32 years old, owns 5,000 acres, no debts, no scandals. As if he were livestock being appraised. She'd imagined someone older, harder, worn down by the brutality everyone said the frontier demanded. Colt Madigan was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of physical labor, not inherited wealth. His face was weathered but not old, tanned in a way that suggested he didn't supervise his ranch from a porch. Dark hair, darker eyes, a mouth that looked like it didn't waste words. He wore work clothes, denim trousers, a shirt that had seen better days, boots that had seen worse. A gun belt sat on his hips like it belonged there. He removed his hat. "Miss Carter," he said, and his voice was lower than she'd anticipated, rougher. "I'm Colt Madigan." "Mrs. Madigan," she corrected, lifting her chin. "Legally, as of 3 days ago. The proxy marriage, remember?" Something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, or respect. "Right. The paperwork came through last week." They stood there in the middle of the platform, 2 strangers bound by a contract signed in a Boston office by men who'd never set foot in Montana. The wind kicked up dust between them. "Your trunk," he said finally, nodding toward where the conductor was unloading it. "That everything?" "It's everything I was permitted to bring." Another flicker. He studied her for a moment, and she forced herself not to look away. She'd learned that too. Never show fear, never show weakness, never let them see you break. "Permitted," he repeated quietly. Then he moved past her, lifting her trunk like it weighed nothing, and carried it toward a wagon hitched to 2 horses that looked considerably more well-fed than most of the people she'd seen. She followed, navigating the platform's gaps in her traveling boots, feeling the stares. Men loitering outside the general store, women peering through dirty windows. Everyone measuring, judging, wondering what kind of fool woman would come out here willingly. If they only knew, she thought. Colt secured her trunk in the wagon bed, then turned back. For a moment, she thought he might offer his hand to help her up. Instead, he just waited. She climbed up herself, arranging her skirts, taking the seat beside him. He climbed up after her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horses started moving. Stillwater fell away behind them. They rode in silence for the first mile. The road, Really just a trail worn into the earth by wagon wheels and weather, cut through open grassland that seemed to extend forever in every direction. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with snow despite it being late May. The sky was bigger than any sky had a right to be, overwhelming in its emptiness. "It's about 8 miles to the ranch," Colt said finally. "We'll be there before dark." "Thank you for the information." More silence. The wagon creaked. The horse's hooves made rhythmic sounds against packed earth. "Your father," Colt said, and Evelyn's spine straightened. "In his letters, he made you sound like a burden he was eager to discharge." The bluntness of it stole her breath. In Boston society, such things were understood but never spoken. Polite fictions were maintained, faces were saved. "My father," she said carefully, "is a practical man who makes practical arrangements." "That's one way of putting it." She turned to look at him. "And you're a practical man who answered his advertisement. So perhaps we're both where we deserve to be." He glanced at her, and for the first time, something like amusement touched his features. "You got teeth. Good. You'll need them out here." "Because you plan to require biting?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, defensive, but she couldn't take them back. Colt was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, less rough, more deliberate. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear it clear. I didn't buy a slave. I didn't purchase a servant. What I agreed to was a marriage, legal and binding, between two adults. You'll have work to do, everyone does on a ranch, but you'll be treated with respect. You'll have your own space when you need it, and no man, including me, will lay a hand on you without your permission. Is that understood?" Evelyn stared at him. In all the terrible scenarios she'd imagined during the 3-day train journey, and she'd imagined many, this hadn't been one of them. Frontiermen, everyone said, took what they wanted. Women out here were scarce, valuable in the way livestock was valuable, used until they broke. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why promise respect? Why promise space? You could simply take what you want. I have no recourse, no family coming to rescue me, no money of my own. I'm legally yours." His jaw tightened. "Because I've seen what happens when men treat their wives like property. I've buried enough beaten women to know I won't be that kind of man." The words hung between them, heavy with histories she didn't know. "Then what kind of man are you?" she asked quietly. "The kind who keeps his word," he said, "and the kind who expects the same in return." "Meaning?" "Meaning if you agree to be here, truly agree, not just tolerate, I'll make sure you have everything you need to survive this place. But if you're going to run, or scheme to get back east, or make this harder than it has to be, I'd rather know now." Evelyn looked out at the vast Montana landscape, at the endless grass and distant mountains, at the raw frontier emptiness that made Boston feel like something from another world. "I won't run," she said. "Because you can't, or because you won't? Does it matter?" "It does to me." She turned back to him. His eyes were steady, waiting. "I won't run," she repeated, "because despite what my father thinks, I'm not a coward. I don't tolerate situations. I assess them, adapt to them, and find ways to improve them. So if this is where my life is now, then this is the life I'll learn to navigate." Colt nodded slowly. "Fair enough." They rode on. The sun was lowering toward the mountains when the ranch came into view. It wasn't grand, nothing out here was, but it was substantial. A 2-story house made of logs and stone, sturdy looking, with a covered porch and real glass windows. Beyond it, a barn, several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and in the distance, cattle dotting the hillsides like dark stones scattered across green felt. 5,000 acres, Colt said. Give or take, most of it grazing land. We run about 1,500 head of cattle, plus the horses. Got 6 hands working full-time, more during drives and roundups. How many women? He looked at her. On the ranch? Yes. You. The words settled into her bones. There's a woman, Maria, comes twice a week from town to help with laundry and heavy cleaning, Colt added. But day to day it's you, me, and the hands. They sleep in the bunkhouse. You'll have privacy. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. Colt set the brake, climbed down, then finally offered his hand. This time, Evelyn took it. His palm was calloused, warm. He helped her down, released her hand immediately. "I'll show you the house," he said. Inside was cleaner than she'd expected. The main room held a stone fireplace, a dining table that could seat 8, chairs that didn't match but looked solid, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, shelves stocked with basic supplies. Stairs leading up. 2 bedrooms upstairs, Colt said, watching her take it in. "You'll have the larger one. It faces east, gets morning sun. There's a washroom. We've got a cistern and pump, so you won't have to haul from the well." "And where will you sleep?" "The smaller room, unless—" He stopped. "Unless what?" "Unless you'd prefer different arrangements. Eventually." The implication sat between them, unspoken but understood. "The separate rooms are acceptable," Evelyn said. "All right then." He brought in her trunk, carried it upstairs. She followed, watching him set it down in a room that was simple but not uncomfortable. A bed with an iron frame and a quilt that looked handmade. A dresser. A small table with a basin and pitcher. A window overlooking the grazing land. "I'll let you settle," Colt said. "Dinner's at 6. Nothing fancy. Beans and cornbread tonight. If you're hungry before then, there's bread and preserves in the kitchen." He was halfway to the door when she spoke. "Mr. Madigan." He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for the separate room, for the promises. I don't know if I believe them yet, but I appreciate them being made." Something softened in his expression. "Give it time, Mrs. Madigan. Belief comes with evidence." Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs. Evelyn stood alone in her new room, in her new house, in her new life. She moved to the window and looked out at the vastness of Montana spreading in every direction. Somewhere out there, her father was probably celebrating his successful negotiation, having traded his difficult daughter for a business connection and the erasure of debts she'd never been told about. She should hate this place, should hate the man downstairs, should hate every piece of this trap she'd been forced into. But standing there, watching the sun paint the mountains gold, she felt something unexpected. Possibility. What? The next morning began before dawn. Evelyn woke to the sound of men's voices outside, boots on gravel, horses nickering in the pre-dawn darkness. She dressed quickly, one of her appropriate dresses, brown calico with a practical skirt, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but coffee sat warming on the stove. She poured herself a cup, black, and drank it standing at the window. The door opened. Colt entered, saw her, stopped. "You're up early," he said. "I heard activity. I assumed that meant the day had started." "For the hands, yeah. You could have slept longer." "To what purpose?" He moved past her to refill his own coffee cup. He smelled like horses and leather and the outdoor cold. "Most women would take the extra rest." "I'm not most women. I'm starting to see that." They stood in the kitchen, drinking coffee as light began to seep through the windows. Outside, the ranch was coming alive, hands moving between buildings, horses being saddled, work beginning. "What needs doing today?" Evelyn asked. Colt raised an eyebrow. "You asking for work?" "I'm asking what needs to be done on a ranch. If I'm going to live here, I should understand how it operates." He studied her over his coffee cup. "You mean that?" "I don't waste words on things I don't mean." "All right then." He set down his cup. "Come on." She followed him outside into the sharp morning air. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky was lightening to gray. Colt led her toward the barn, where 3 men were preparing to ride out. "Boys," Colt called, "come meet the missus." They turned. 3 weathered men in working clothes, all with the lean, hard look of men who lived outdoor lives. They removed their hats. "Ma'am," the oldest one said. He had gray in his beard and scars on his hands. "I'm Dutch. Been working for Mr. Madigan near 5 years now." "Tom," said the second, younger, with nervous eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers. "And I'm Shaw," said the third, who had a crooked smile and an accent that suggested he wasn't from Montana originally. "Welcome to the ranch, Mrs. Madigan." "Thank you," Evelyn said. "I'm pleased to meet you all." "Dutch is my foreman," Colt explained. "He runs the day-to-day operations when I'm dealing with other business. Tom handles the horses mostly. Shaw's our best hand with cattle." And the other 3 hands you mentioned? Out checking the northern fence line. You'll meet them at dinner. What are you checking today? She asked Dutch. The older man glanced at Colt, as if asking permission to answer. Colt nodded. Water situation, ma'am, Dutch said. We've got a creek that runs through the eastern section, feeds into a bigger stream that crosses 3 properties. Been some disputes lately about usage rights. What kind of disputes? The kind where fences get cut and cattle end up on the wrong side of property lines, Colt said flatly. We're riding out to make sure our sections are secure. Is this related to Silas Rourke? Evelyn asked. The men went still. Colt's eyes narrowed. Where'd you hear that name? On the train, 2 men were discussing Montana ranchers. The name Rourke came up several times, usually preceded by profanity. Shaw barked a laugh. Sounds about right. What did they say? Colt asked, his voice careful. Evelyn set down her coffee cup. That he's been buying up land and water rights. That he has territorial ambitions that exceed legal boundaries. That he's dangerous to cross. All true, Dutch muttered. Is he the source of your fence problems? Can't prove it, Colt said. But, yeah, probably. Then you should document everything, Evelyn said. Dates, locations, damages, build a record. If he's operating outside the law, evidence matters. The men stared at her. Ma'am, Shaw said slowly, you just got here yesterday. I'm aware. Does that make the advice incorrect? No, but... He looked at Colt. Boss? Colt was watching Evelyn with an expression she couldn't quite read. She's right, he said finally. We should have been keeping records all along. Dutch, start a log today. Every cut fence, every suspicious incident, write it down with dates and witnesses. Yes, sir. Anything else we should know, Mrs. Madigan? Colt asked, and there was something almost challenging in his tone. Not yet, Evelyn said, but if you're willing to explain how the ranch operates, finances, supply chains, market relationships, I might be able to identify other vulnerabilities. You know about ranch finances? I know about finances generally. My father ran a shipping business. I managed his books for 3 years before he decided I was more valuable as a bargaining chip. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Colt's expression shifted, less challenging now, more thoughtful. All right, he said. Tonight, after dinner, we'll go through the ledgers. I'd appreciate that. He nodded to his men. Let's ride. We'll be back by afternoon. Evelyn watched them mount up and head out across the grassland, 3 figures growing smaller against the massive landscape. Then she turned back to the house. If she was going to survive here, truly survive, not just endure, she needed to understand everything. The land, the business, the threats, the opportunities. Knowledge was the only real power she'd ever had, and she wasn't about to abandon it now. She spent the morning exploring the house thoroughly, taking inventory. The pantry was well-stocked but unorganized. The root cellar needed better ventilation. The kitchen could be arranged more efficiently. Small things, but small things added up. When Maria arrived, a stocky Mexican woman in her 50s with kind eyes and strong opinions about laundry, Evelyn didn't retreat to her room like a fine lady. She rolled up her sleeves and helped, asking questions, learning the rhythms of ranch household management. You don't have to do this, Senora, Maria said, watching her scrub shirts in the wash basin. If I don't learn, I'll be useless when you're not here, Evelyn replied. Maria smiled. Mr. Colt, he chose well. He chose someone my father wanted to dispose of. Same thing, maybe. Men don't always know what they need until it arrives. By afternoon, Evelyn had clean clothes drying on lines, bread rising in the kitchen, and a much clearer understanding of the physical work required to keep a ranch household functioning. Her hands were raw, her back ached, and her appropriate dress was stained with wash water. She'd never felt more competent in her life. When Colt and the hands returned at 4, they found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, flour on her cheek, pulling fresh bread from the oven. Colt stopped in the doorway. You bake? I'm learning. Maria showed me. This is my 3rd attempt. The first 2 were inedible. And this one? Probably just barely edible. We'll find out at dinner. He moved closer, looking at the loaves cooling on the counter. You didn't have to. I know. I wanted to. Is there a problem? No problem. He paused. You've got flour. Right here. He gestured to his own cheek. She wiped at her face, missing it. Other side. Here. He reached out, then stopped, hand hovering. May I? She nodded. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, wiping away the flour. His hand was rough, warm. He was close enough that she could see the lighter flecks in his dark eyes, the small scar near his temple. There, he said quietly, stepping back. Got it. Thank you. The moment hung between them, different from the careful distance they'd maintained. Ledgers, Colt said abruptly. After dinner, I'll show you everything. I'll be ready. Dinner was loud, all 6 hands present now, crowded around the table, passing food, trading insults and stories. The bread was dense but not terrible. The stew was better. Evelyn sat at one end of the table, Colt at the other, and listened to the rhythms of men who'd worked together long enough to communicate in half-sentences and knowing looks. Mrs. Madigan, one of the new hands said, a young man named Carter with sunburned skin. That true you told the boss to keep records on Rourke? The table went quiet. I suggested documentation might be useful, Evelyn said carefully. Why? Because that's smart thinking, Carter said. My pa lost his land to Rourke 2 years back. Had no proof of the intimidation, the threats, just his word against a rich man's lawyers. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be sorry, ma'am. Just be careful. Rourke don't like people who cross him, and he sure don't like people who outsmart him. Then we'll have to be very careful, Evelyn said, and very smart. Shaw grinned. I'm starting to like you, Mrs. Madigan. After dinner, the hands retreated to the bunkhouse. Evelyn helped clear dishes, then joined Colt in what he called his office, really just a corner of the main room with a desk and shelves of ledgers. He pulled out 3 books, set them on the desk. 5 years of records, he said. Income, expenses, livestock counts, everything. Evelyn opened the first ledger. Her father's books had been meticulous, every penny accounted for, every transaction documented with almost obsessive precision. These were different. The information was present, but disorganized, inconsistent. Some months had detailed entries, others just rough totals. Categories weren't standardized. You keep these yourself? She asked. Yeah. No bookkeeper? Nearest one's in Helena. That's a 3-day ride. She turned pages, absorbing information, seeing patterns. Your cattle sales are good, strong prices, but your supply costs are higher than they should be. Everything's expensive out here. I understand that, but you're paying 20% more than standard rates for basic goods. Who's your supplier? General store in Stillwater. Only option close by. Except it's not your only option. You could organize a collective purchase with neighboring ranches, pool orders, negotiate bulk rates directly with suppliers in Helena or even Denver, split the freight costs. Colt leaned against the desk, arms crossed, watching her work through his finances. You figured that out in 5 minutes? It's basic economics. You're being charged a premium for convenience. Remove the convenience, remove the premium. And convince my neighbors to cooperate. Are they paying the same inflated prices? Probably. Then they have the same motivation, unless... She looked up. Is this about Rourke too? Colt's jaw tightened. The general store owner's in Rourke's pocket, has been for a year now. So he sets prices high for everyone except Rourke's operations. That'd be my guess. Evelyn closed the ledger. Then you need alternative supply chains, documented price disparities, and evidence of collusion. Build a case for anti-competitive practices. You keep talking about building cases like there's law out here that matters. Is there? Some. Territorial law, federal law, but enforcement's thin. Sheriff's office is in Stillwater, one man covering 600 square miles. Judges ride circuit, show up maybe 3 times a year. But they do show up. Eventually. Then eventually is when you present your evidence. She met his eyes. Unless you're planning to handle this another way. The unspoken question, are you planning violence? Colt held her gaze. I prefer solutions that don't end with graves being dug. But I won't roll over for a man like Rourke, either. Good, Evelyn said. Neither will I. He studied her for a long moment. You meant what you said this morning, didn't you? About understanding the threats. Every word. Why? You could stay in this house, manage the household, avoid the complications. Because complications don't avoid you just because you ignore them, she said, and because I refuse to be helpless. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. All right then, he said. Tomorrow I'll show you the property boundaries, explain the water rights situation properly. You should know what we're actually dealing with. I'd like that. They worked through the ledgers for another hour, Evelyn asking questions, Colt providing context. By the time she climbed the stairs to her room, her mind was full of numbers, strategies, possibilities. She undressed, washed, climbed into bed. Through her window, she could see stars scattered across the Montana sky like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. The vastness of it still stole her breath. Somewhere out there, her father was probably sleeping soundly, confident he'd successfully disposed of a problem. He had no idea what he'd actually done. He'd given her an opportunity. And Evelyn Carter Madigan didn't waste opportunities. The sun was barely clearing the eastern hills when Colt saddled 2 horses the next morning. Evelyn watched from the porch, coffee cup warming her hands, as he worked with efficient movements that spoke of 32 years spent doing exactly this. "You ride?" he called over. "I was taught when I was 12, haven't done it in years. It'll come back." He gestured to the smaller of the 2 horses, a roan mare with intelligent eyes. "This is Sadie. She's got sense. Won't bolt, won't throw you unless you do something truly stupid." Evelyn set down her cup and approached. The mare turned her head, regarding her with what looked like skepticism. "She's judging me," Evelyn said. "She judges everyone. You'll get along fine." Colt handed her the reins. "Left foot in the stirrup, swing up and over. Try not to think about it too much." She managed it on the second attempt, settling into the saddle with only minor indignity. The ground looked farther away than she remembered. Colt swung onto his own horse, a tall bay gelding that seemed barely contained beneath him. "We'll take it slow. I want to show you the eastern boundary first, where the creek runs through." They rode out across land that was already growing familiar to Evelyn. The roll of the hills, the endless grass moving like water in the wind, the mountains standing watch in the distance. The morning air was cold enough that she could see her breath, but the sun was climbing, promising warmth. 5,000 acres, Colt said after they'd been riding for 20 minutes. "Sounds like a lot until you're trying to run cattle on it. Montana's different from back east. Land's harder. Weather's meaner. What would support 100 head in Pennsylvania might only support 20 here. Because of the grass quality? That and the winters. We lose cattle every year to cold, predators, disease. It's just part of the equation." They crested a rise and the land opened up before them, a valley with a creek cutting through it. Cottonwoods clustered along the banks, cattle grazing in loose groups. "This is the eastern section," Colt said. "That creek feeds from snowmelt up in the mountains, runs year-round. Most important water source we've got besides the well near the house." Evelyn studied the terrain, trying to see it the way he did, not as scenery but as resource and liability. "Where does it come from before it reaches your land?" "Rourke's property." His voice went flat. "Flows through the corner of his holdings, then crosses onto mine, then continues south to the Miller Ranch and eventually into the river. So he controls the source." "Not legally. Water rights out here are complicated. It's not like owning land. There's prior appropriation, reasonable use, a whole mess of territorial law that nobody agrees on. But Rourke's been acting like he owns every drop that crosses his property." "How?" Colt pointed upstream. "See those cottonwoods? About a half-mile north of here, just past my boundary, he's been building up the banks, creating obstacles, slowing the flow." "Is that legal?" "Depends who you ask. His lawyers say he's within his rights to make improvements on his land. Everyone else says he's deliberately restricting water to force neighboring ranches to negotiate." "Negotiate for what?" "Land, water rights, partnership deals that give him controlling interest." Colt's jaw tightened. "He tried it with me 6 months ago. Sent his foreman over with an offer. I sell him this eastern section, he guarantees consistent water flow to the rest of my property." "You refused." "I'm not selling my land to a man who's creating the problem he's offering to solve." Evelyn turned in her saddle to look at him. "That's extortion." "That's business, according to Rourke." They rode along the creek bank, and Evelyn could see what Colt meant about the flow. The water moved sluggishly, lower than the bank suggested it should be. In places, cattle had worn paths to drinking spots, the mud churned and tracked. If he restricts it further, she said, what happens? Depends on the season. Spring like this, with snow melt, we'd survive. Come August, when it's dry and hot, we'd be in trouble. Cattle need water. No water, they die, or we drive them somewhere else. Either way, I lose. And he knows that. He's counting on it. They stopped at a spot where the creek widened into a small pool. Colt dismounted and Evelyn followed, less gracefully. Her legs protested being back on solid ground. There's more, Colt said, crouching by the water's edge. Come look at this. She joined him. He pointed to marks in the mud near the bank, boot prints, fresh enough that the edges hadn't eroded yet. Someone was here recently, Evelyn said. Last night, probably. See how the prints overlap the cattle tracks? Cattle don't move much at night. Whoever this was came after dark. Doing what? That's what worries me. He stood, scanning the area. Could be nothing. Could be Rourke's men checking on how low the water's running. Could be they're planning something worse. Worse than restricting water? Poisoning it. Wouldn't take much. Dead animal, upstream, some chemicals. Creek this size, contamination would spread fast. The casual way he said it made Evelyn's stomach turn. Would he really? I don't know what he'd do. That's the problem. Colt moved back to his horse. 2 years ago, the Hendersons had a ranch about 15 miles west of here. Good operation. Been in the family since the 60s. Rourke wanted their land because it had river access. They wouldn't sell. 6 months later, their barn burned down. Lost 30 horses. Then their well went bad. Something in the water table. Experts couldn't explain it. Then cattle started dying 1 or 2 at a time, no clear cause. And Rourke? Made another offer, much lower than the first. They took it. He swung into his saddle. I'm not saying he was responsible for everything that happened, but the timing was interesting. Evelyn mounted Sadie, her mind working through implications. If you can't prove he's behind the incidents, then it's just bad luck, and bad luck can't be prosecuted. They rode in silence for a while, following the creek south toward where it crossed into the next property. The sun was higher now, warming Evelyn's shoulders through her jacket. What about the other ranchers? She asked. The Millers, you mentioned them, others in the area. Are they dealing with the same pressures? Some. Rourke's strategic about it. He doesn't move on everyone at once, too obvious. He picks off the vulnerable ones. Small operations, family ranches with debt, anyone who's had a bad year. Creating a pattern that looks like natural attrition. Exactly. But if the other ranchers organized, that's a nice idea from someone who grew up in civilization, Colt said, not unkindly. Out here, ranchers don't organize. They compete. They guard their water rights, their grazing land, their market connections. Getting them to cooperate is like getting roosters to share a henhouse. Even against a common threat? Especially then, everyone thinks they can cut a better deal on their own. Evelyn considered this. Back in Boston, her father's shipping business had faced similar situations. Competitors trying to undercut, monopolize, drive out smaller operations. The successful response had always been coalition building, collective bargaining, but her father had also been ruthless about it, willing to sacrifice smaller players to protect his own interests. What if you didn't ask them to cooperate? She said slowly. What if you offered them something they couldn't get on their own? Colt glanced at her. Like what? Information. You're documenting Rourke's activities now, keeping records. What if you shared those records with other ranchers experiencing similar problems? Not asking them to join forces, just providing evidence that the pattern exists. To what end? To plant seeds. Right now, everyone thinks they're dealing with isolated bad luck. If they realize it's systematic, coordinated, that changes the calculation. They might not organize, but they'll be more resistant to Rourke's offers. And if enough people resist, he has to change tactics or give up. Exactly. Colt was quiet, thinking. They'd reached the southern boundary now, marked by a fence that had seen better days. Beyond it, Evelyn could see the Miller Ranch, smaller buildings, fewer cattle, land that looked more worn. It's not a bad idea, Colt said finally, but it requires getting ranchers to trust each other enough to share information. That's a tall order. Then start small. One rancher, someone you trust. The only rancher I really trust is Ben Miller, and he's barely holding on as it is. His wife died last winter, left him with 3 kids and a ranch that's been struggling for years. He's exactly the kind Rourke targets. Then warn him. Show him your records, explain the pattern. Give him the choice to prepare or not. Colt studied her. You think like someone who's used to fighting battles. I think like someone who learned early that information is the only reliable weapon. And who taught you that? My father. Usually by using it against me. Something in her voice made Colt's expression soften. He sounds like a real bastard. He's a businessman who prioritizes outcomes over people, which, in the end, amounts to the same thing. They turned the horses back toward the ranch. The sun was approaching noon and Evelyn's legs were starting to seriously protest the unaccustomed riding. There's something else you should know, Colt said as they rode. Rourke's not just after land and water. He's got political ambitions. Rumor is he's planning to run for territorial legislature next year, which would give him influence over land use policy, and water rights legislation, and grazing regulations, everything that affects how ranches operate. So this isn't just about building a cattle empire, it's about building power. The cattle empire is how he funds the power. The power is what he really wants. Evelyn absorbed this, fitting it into the larger picture forming in her mind. A man like that wouldn't stop with a few ranches. He'd keep expanding, consolidating, until he controlled the entire region. How much land does he own now? She asked. Last I heard, about 20,000 acres, plus water rights, mining interests, the general store, part ownership in the bank. He owns the bank? Not all of it, but enough to influence lending decisions. So he controls credit, supplies, water, and is working toward controlling law and policy. Evelyn shook her head. That's not a cattle rancher. That's someone building a fiefdom. Welcome to Montana Territory, Colt said grimly. They were within sight of the ranch buildings when Dutch came riding hard from the opposite direction. His horse lathered. Colt immediately spurred his own mount forward. What happened? Northern fence, Dutch called as he approached. Cut in 3 places. At least 50 head wandered through onto Rourke's land. When? Sometime last night. Carter found it this morning on his check. Colt's face went hard. Same spots as last time? Near enough. They know the weak points. Where's Carter now? Tracking the cattle. Tom and Shaw went with him. Colt looked at Evelyn. Can you make it back to the house from here? Yes, but go straight there. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone except me or the hands you've met. The intensity in his voice made her stomach tighten. You think this is more than fence cutting? I think someone was on our land last night leaving boot prints by the creek, and now we've got cut fences. I don't believe in coincidence. He was already turning his horse. Dutch, show me! They rode off at a gallop, leaving Evelyn alone on Sadie with the ranch buildings a quarter mile ahead. She urged the mare forward, fighting the urge to look over her shoulder. The landscape that had seemed beautiful an hour ago now felt exposed, vulnerable. Anyone could be watching from the hills, hidden in the draws, following the creek beds. By the time she reached the house, her heart was hammering. She dismounted clumsily, tied Sadie to the porch rail, and went inside, locking the door behind her. The house felt too quiet. She moved to the window, watching the distant figures of Colt and Dutch disappear over the northern rise. Then she went to Colt's office corner and pulled out the newest ledger, the one where he'd started documenting incidents. She opened it to a fresh page and began writing. Date, time discovered, location, damage assessment. She added the boot prints by the creek, noted the timing correlation. Pattern recognition was something she was good at, had to be good at, growing up in a household where her father's mood shifted like weather, and the only warning was paying attention to details everyone else missed. She was still writing when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Evelyn froze, pen in hand. The hoofbeats stopped outside. Boots on the porch steps. A knock. Mrs. Madigan? It's Maria. Relief flooded through her. Evelyn unlocked the door. Maria stood there with her usual basket of cleaning supplies, but her expression was worried. I passed Mr. Colt on the road. He looked angry. Is there trouble? Cut fences, missing cattle. Rourke? Probably. Maria stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind her. Then you should not be alone. I will stay today. You don't have to. My husband, he worked for a rancher Rourke destroyed. I know what that man does. She set down her basket. You are new here. You do not understand yet how dangerous he is. Then tell me, Evelyn said, because everyone keeps warning me, but nobody's giving me specific information. Maria moved to the kitchen, started heating water for coffee like she needed something to do with her hands. 3 years ago, there was a rancher named Sullivan, Irish man, came here after the war. He had good land, good water. Rourke wanted it. Sullivan said no. She paused, measuring coffee into the pot. Sullivan had a daughter, 16 years old, pretty girl. She was riding alone one day, came back different. Wouldn't say what happened, but everyone knew. 2 weeks later, she was gone, sent back east to family. Sullivan sold his land to Rourke the next month. Evelyn felt cold. Did Sullivan report it? To who? The sheriff works for Rourke. The territorial marshal is 200 miles away, and the girl wouldn't testify, too ashamed, too scared. Sullivan had no proof, just a broken daughter and Rourke's men smiling at him in town. That's... Evelyn couldn't find words. That is the frontier, Maria said quietly. The law exists, but it is far away. The men with money and guns make their own law. The coffee began to boil. Maria poured 2 cups, handed one to Evelyn. Mr. Colt is a good man, she said. He treats his workers fair, pays on time, does not cheat. But good men do not always win against bad men with more resources. They can if they're smart about it. You think being smart is enough? I think being smart and being prepared is better than being neither. Maria studied her. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? A soft Eastern lady who would cry when she saw how hard life is here. But you do not cry. You write in books and ask questions and talk about being prepared. Mr. Colt, he chose better than he knew. He didn't choose. My father made an arrangement. And yet here you are, not crying. Maria smiled slightly. Maybe your father did you a favor without meaning to. They spent the afternoon together, Maria teaching Evelyn more about managing the household, while Evelyn asked questions about the area, the people, the politics. Every piece of information was something she could use, a tool she could apply. It was nearly sunset when Colt and the hands returned. Evelyn heard the horses first, then voices, men tired and frustrated. She went to the door. Colt dismounted heavily. His face was streaked with dust and sweat, his expression grim. Did you find the cattle? Evelyn asked. Found them on Rourke's land. Like Dutch said, he's claiming they wandered over, that he was just about to notify me. But the fences were cut. He says cattle cut fences all the time, rubbing against posts, pushing through weak spots. That's absurd. That's his story. Colt pulled off his gloves. And unless I can prove otherwise, it's his word against mine. You have documentation now. The log will take time to build into something useful. Right now, it's just one incident. He looked exhausted. I need to clean up. We'll talk after dinner. The meal was quieter than usual, the hands subdued. Even Shaw's usual jokes fell flat. Evelyn served the stew she'd made earlier, bread that was getting better each attempt, coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. How many head did we lose? She asked when the plates were mostly cleared. 52, Dutch said. Rourke's giving them back, but he's demanding compensation for his trouble. How much? $100. Evelyn set down her cup. For keeping track of cattle that were driven onto his land by his men cutting your fences. Can't prove it was his men, Tom muttered. Can't prove it wasn't, Shaw countered. Doesn't matter, Colt said. We're not paying. He can keep the cattle if he wants. They're worth maybe 300 total. He's trying to establish a pattern where we owe him. Or he's trying to provoke you into refusing so he has an excuse for escalation, Evelyn said. The table went quiet. What kind of escalation? Carter asked. I don't know, but if his goal is acquiring land and legal pressure isn't working fast enough, he might try creating a crisis that forces your hand. Like what the Hendersons went through, Dutch said slowly. Exactly like that. A series of incidents that separately seem like bad luck, but together create an untenable situation. Colt leaned back in his chair. So what do we do? Wait for the barn to burn down? No, we prepare for the possibility. We document everything, we shore up vulnerabilities, we build relationships with other ranchers who might be facing similar pressures. We make it clear that we're paying attention and we're not isolated. And if that doesn't work, Evelyn met his eyes. Then we make sure we're not the only ones watching when he makes his next move. After dinner, after the hands had retreated and Maria had left for town, Evelyn and Colt sat in his office corner, going through the ledgers again. Your supply costs, Evelyn said, pointing to a column. You said the general store owner is in Rourke's pocket. Have you considered bypassing the store entirely? I told you, nearest alternative is Helena. What about a buying cooperative with other ranches? Pool resources? Send someone to Helena once a month with a collective order. That requires other ranches to participate. Start with Ben Miller. You said he's struggling. Cheaper supplies would help him. If he agrees, use that as leverage with others. Colt rubbed his face. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's possible. And doing something is better than waiting for Rourke's next move. You really believe that? I believe that passive targets are easier to hit than moving ones. He looked at her for a long moment. How are you this calm about all this? You've been here less than a week. You're learning your husband is in a range war with a man who destroys people for sport. And you're sitting here making strategic plans like it's a business meeting. What would you prefer? That I panic? Cry? Beg you to take me back east? I'd prefer to know what you're actually feeling. The honesty of it surprised her. Evelyn set down her pen. I'm terrified, she said quietly. I'm in a place I don't understand, married to a man I barely know, facing threats I can't fully assess. Every instinct I have says I should be afraid. But fear without action is just paralysis. And I learned a long time ago that the best way to survive being afraid is to stay busy solving problems. Your father teach you that too? My father taught me that showing fear was weakness, and weakness invited attack. I taught myself that fear could be useful if you channeled it into preparation. Colt was quiet. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what? For dragging you into this. You came here expecting, I don't know what you were expecting, but probably not a range war. I came here expecting a frontier marriage, which everyone says is brutal and hard. So far, you've been remarkably civilized. The range war is just context. That pulled a tired smile from him. Remarkably civilized. That's probably the nicest thing anyone said about me in months. Don't let it go to your head. They worked for another hour, refining strategies, identifying resources, planning next steps. By the time Evelyn climbed the stairs to her room, her eyes were burning with fatigue. She undressed, washed, fell into bed. Sleep came fast but brought dreams, boot prints in mud, cut fences, cattle wandering into darkness. A man with a face she'd never seen standing at the edge of the firelight, watching. She woke before dawn to voices shouting. Evelyn was out of bed and dressed in minutes, running downstairs. Colt was already at the door, pulling on his gun belt, Dutch beside him. What happened? She demanded. Fire, Colt said. The Miller Ranch. Ben's youngest rode over to get help. Her stomach dropped. The barn? The house. Colt was already moving, shouting orders to the hands tumbling out of the bunkhouse. Within minutes, they were mounted and riding hard into the pre-dawn darkness. Evelyn stood on the porch, watching them disappear, her heart hammering. The Hendersons' barn had burned. Now the Miller's house. The pattern was clear, and Colt Madigan's ranch was next. Evelyn didn't go back inside. She stood on that porch watching the eastern horizon, waiting for the sky to show whether it was dawn breaking or the Miller Ranch burning bright enough to light up the darkness. The wind carried the smell of smoke, faint but unmistakable, and her hands gripped the porch rail hard enough that splinters bit into her palms. When the sun finally rose 2 hours later, Colt and the hands returned looking like they'd been to hell. Their faces were streaked black with soot, their clothes reeked of smoke, and Dutch was supporting a burn on his forearm wrapped in someone's torn shirt. Colt dismounted slowly, like every muscle hurt. Evelyn met him at the bottom of the steps. How bad? She asked. House is gone. Barn's partly collapsed. They saved some of the livestock. His voice was rough from smoke. Ben and the kids are alive. That's something. Where are they now? Neighbors took them in temporarily, the Crawfords, about 4 miles west. He pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. It's Started in the kitchen sometime after midnight. Spread fast. Whole structure went up like it was soaked in kerosene. Was it? He looked at her. Can't prove it. The fire was too hot. Destroyed most of the evidence. But Ben says he banked the stove properly before bed, and there was no reason for it to catch like that. Rourke. Probably. Colt's jaw tightened. But probably doesn't hold up when the sheriff comes asking questions. Dutch came over, cradling his burned arm. Boss, we need to post watches. If Rourke's escalating this fast... I know. Colt turned to the other hands gathering around. Shaw, Tom, Carter. I want one of you on watch at all times, rotating every 4 hours. Check the barn, the outbuildings, anywhere fire could start easy. If you see anything suspicious, wake everyone. Don't try to handle it alone. What about you? Shaw asked. I'll take a rotation too. We all will. The men nodded and headed off to clean up and rest before their shifts. Colt started toward the house, then stopped, swaying slightly. Evelyn caught his arm. When did you last sleep? I don't remember. Inside, now. I need to check the property, make sure... You need to sleep for a few hours before you fall over. Your hands can manage the property. He looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. Evelyn guided him inside, up the stairs, and into his room, smaller than hers, she noticed, with barely enough space for the bed and a chest of drawers. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Just an hour, he said. However long you need. She left him there, pulling the door closed. Downstairs, she found Maria already arriving with her basket, her expression grim. I heard about the Millers, Maria said. The whole town is talking. What are they saying? That it was an accident, bad luck, a stove that wasn't properly maintained. She set down her basket. No one says Rourke's name. They are too afraid. Evelyn moved to the kitchen, started making coffee. Her hands were steadier than she expected. Tell me about the sheriff. Thomas Harding. He has been sheriff for 8 years. Before Rourke bought the general store and the bank shares, Harding was honest. Now? Maria shrugged. Now he investigates what Rourke tells him to investigate. Would he ignore evidence if it was presented clearly? Depends on the evidence and who presents it. What if it came from multiple sources? Other ranchers, witnesses, documented patterns? Maria studied her. You are thinking like someone planning a war. I'm thinking like someone who refuses to be a victim. Those are the same thing out here. They worked through the morning, Evelyn helping with tasks that needed doing, laundry, cooking, maintaining the household that didn't stop functioning just because the world outside was catching fire. Her mind kept circling back to the problem, looking for angles, weaknesses, opportunities. Around noon, a rider approached. Evelyn watched from the window as a man she didn't recognize dismounted and knocked. She opened the door cautiously. Ma'am, I'm looking for Colt Madigan. Name's Ben Miller. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with the lean build of a man who worked hard and ate light. His clothes still smelled of smoke, and his eyes had the hollowed-out look of someone who'd lost everything overnight. He's resting, Evelyn said. He was at your ranch until dawn, fighting the fire. Can I help you? You're his wife. The one from back east? I am. Ben removed his hat. I wanted to thank him. Him and his men, they saved my kids, got them out through a back window when the front of the house was already gone. His voice cracked slightly. My youngest, she's only 6. If they hadn't come when they did, I'm glad they were able to help, Evelyn said quietly. I'm very sorry about your home. It's just a building. Buildings can be rebuilt. But the way he said it suggested he didn't quite believe it. Is Colt awake? I need to talk to him about something. Evelyn hesitated, then made a decision. Come inside, I'll wake him. She led Ben to the main room, got him coffee, then went upstairs. Colt was sprawled across his bed, fully clothed, dead asleep. She touched his shoulder. Colt, Ben Miller's here. He was awake instantly, reaching for the gun on his nightstand before his eyes fully focused. Then he processed her words and lowered the weapon. Ben? Why? He wants to talk to you. Colt was on his feet, running a hand over his face to clear the sleep. They went downstairs together. Ben stood when they entered. Colt, I owe you. You don't owe me anything, Colt said. How are your kids? Scared, confused, alive because of you and your men. Ben set down his coffee cup. I need to tell you something. Before the fire started, I heard horses, multiple riders, moving past the house toward the barn. I thought maybe it was some of my stock getting loose, didn't think much of it, but looking back now, how many riders? Colt's voice sharpened. 3, maybe 4. I couldn't see them, just heard the hoofbeats. Did you tell the sheriff? He came by this morning, asked some questions. I mentioned the horses. He wrote it down, said he'd look into it. Ben's expression hardened. Then he spent 10 minutes explaining how dry wood catches easy, how kitchen stoves are dangerous if not maintained, how these accidents happen. Did he examine the remains? Look for evidence of accelerants? He poked around for maybe 15 minutes, then declared it an accidental fire caused by negligent stove management. Evelyn spoke up. You banked the stove properly. Ben turned to her. I've been banking stoves for 20 years, never had a problem. But you can't prove that, she said. No, ma'am. I can't. Colt moved to the window, staring out at his own property. This is what he does. Creates situations that can't be proven, then waits for you to give up. I know. Ben's voice was tired. The Crawfords offered to let us stay with them for a few weeks, but I can't impose long term. I've got 3 kids, no house, and a ranch I can't afford to rebuild. Rourke's already sent word through his foreman that he's willing to make an offer on the property. How much? Quarter of what it's worth. He called it a generous gesture given the circumstances. The silence that followed was heavy. You don't have to take it, Colt said, but there was resignation in his voice. Don't I? Ben looked at him. What's my alternative? Borrow money I can't repay to rebuild a house that might burn down again? Keep my kids in a place where men ride through in the night setting fires? I'm tired, Colt. I'm broke. I'm scared for my children, and I don't have fight left. Evelyn watched the defeat settle over him like a physical weight. This was what Rourke counted on, not just the destruction but the exhaustion that followed, the calculation that giving up was easier than continuing to resist. What if you didn't have to borrow the money? She heard herself say. Both men turned to her. What if there was another option? She continued, the idea forming as she spoke. What if you partnered with Colt, combined your operations temporarily, you bring your cattle and remaining equipment here, work Colt's ranch together, split the profits. That gives you income while you're getting back on your feet. Ben shook his head. That's generous, but I can't ask. I'm not asking you to ask. I'm proposing a business arrangement that benefits both parties. She looked at Colt. You said yourself you need more hands during certain seasons. Ben has experience, and presumably his older children can help with lighter work. Meanwhile, Ben gets stable income and doesn't have to accept Rourke's insulting offer. And my land? Ben asked. You keep it. Maintain minimal presence, maybe keep some stock there, have someone check it regularly. Show that you're not abandoning it. That prevents Rourke from claiming it's unused and filing for adverse possession or whatever legal mechanism he'd try to use. Colt was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You thought of all that just now? It's basic resource allocation. You have capacity, he has need. Combine them. Ben looked between them. You'd really be willing to do that? Take on my family, my problems? If Rourke's doing this to you today, he'll do it to me tomorrow, Colt said slowly. Evelyn's right. This benefits both of us. You get time to recover without selling out. I get experienced help and an ally who understands what we're up against. And Rourke gets a message, Evelyn added, that his tactics aren't working as intended, that instead of isolating ranchers, he's pushing them together. Ben sat down heavily in the nearest chair. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Colt told him. Move your family here by the end of the week. We'll work out the details, but the basic structure is what Evelyn laid out. Partnership, profit sharing, mutual support. And when I can afford to rebuild? Then you rebuild. The partnership continues or doesn't, depending on what makes sense for both of us at that point. Ben's eyes were wet. He looked away, clearly fighting emotion. Thank you. Both of you. Thank you. After Ben left, Evelyn and Colt stood in the main room. Through the window, she could see the sun starting its descent toward the mountains. That was either very smart or very dangerous, Colt said quietly. Probably both. You just put a target on our backs. Rourke wanted Miller's land. Now he knows we're interfering with that. He already had targets on our backs. The cut fences prove that. At least now we're not alone. Colt turned to face her fully. Where did you learn to think like that? To see solutions in the middle of someone else's crisis? I told you, my father's business. Shipping involves constant problem solving, routes, suppliers, labor, competition. I watched him navigate it for years before he let me handle the books. You learn to see patterns, opportunities, leverage. And you're applying that here. Is there a reason I shouldn't? No, it's just... He stopped, seemed to consider his words. You've been here less than 2 weeks. Most women in your position would still be adjusting to the altitude. You're restructuring ranch partnerships and planning strategic responses to land grabs. Most women in my position weren't raised by a man who saw people as chess pieces. I learned the game early. I'm just finally playing it for myself instead of being played. Something shifted in Colt's expression, respect, maybe, or recognition of something deeper. Remind me never to underestimate you. I'd prefer you just didn't try to protect me from information. I'm more useful when I know everything. Deal. That evening, at dinner with the Hands, Colt announced the partnership with Ben Miller. The reactions were mixed, some approval, some concern, and from Dutch, frank skepticism. Boss, I understand the charitable impulse, Dutch said carefully, but we're talking about housing and feeding 4 more people indefinitely. That's a significant cost, which will be offset by Miller's labor and his cattle added to our herd when we drive to market, Colt replied. It's not charity, it's business. Business that pisses off Rourke, Shaw added. Just want to make sure we're all clear on that. We're clear, Colt said, which is why we're doubling down on security. Watches continue, and I want someone checking on Miller's property twice a day. If Rourke tries to move in claiming abandonment, we'll have witnesses to counter it. What about the other ranchers? Carter asked. Do they know what happened to Miller? They know. Whole territory knows by now. And they're doing nothing? They're protecting their own interests. Can't blame them for that. Evelyn set down her fork. What if we gave them a reason to act? Not asking them to fight Rourke directly, just asking them to share information. We talked about this, Colt said. Getting ranchers to cooperate is difficult, I know, but what happened to Ben changes the calculation. Before it was abstract threats, possible dangers. Now a family's home burned down, and the sheriff called it negligence. That's concrete. That's close. So? So we invite them here. Not as a formal alliance, just as neighbors sharing concerns. Show them the documentation we've been keeping. Let them see the pattern. See if any of them have experienced similar incidents they didn't connect before. Dutch leaned forward. A meeting? Here? Something informal. Dinner, maybe. A gathering where conversation happens naturally. And if Rourke finds out? Then he finds out, Evelyn said. We're not doing anything illegal. Neighbors have dinner together all the time. Shaw grinned. I like her. She's sneaky. I prefer strategic, Evelyn said dryly. Colt looked at her for a long moment. All right, we'll try it. This Sunday, after church services let out, that's when folks are already in town, already socializing. We'll extend invitations, make it casual, see who shows up. And if nobody does, Tom asked, then we know where we stand. The next 3 days were organized chaos. Ben Miller arrived with his 3 children, 2 boys, ages 14 and 11, and the 6-year-old girl who'd nearly died in the fire. Her name was Sarah, and she clung to her father like he might disappear if she let go. Evelyn found the family housing in one of the larger outbuildings that had been converted into livable space, helped arrange bedding and basic furniture, and tried not to think about how young the children looked. The older boys, Michael and James, immediately started helping with ranch work. They knew cattle, knew horses, knew the rhythms of the life they'd been living before it burned down. The younger one, James, kept staring at the main house like he expected it to catch fire at any moment. Give him time, Ben told Evelyn when he caught her watching. He'll adjust. Will he? He'll have to. We all will. Meanwhile, Colt and the Hands rode out daily, maintaining the property, checking fences, watching for new incidents. The northern fence where the cuts had occurred was reinforced. Watches continued around the clock. Dutch's burn healed slowly, the skin angry and pink. On Saturday, Colt rode into Stillwater to extend dinner invitations personally. He came back looking frustrated. The Crawfords will come. Maybe the Johnsons. Everyone else suddenly has prior commitments or sick relatives or urgent work that can't wait. He dropped his hat on the table. They're afraid. Of Rourke? Of being seen associating with us now that we've taken Ben in. They think we're marked. We are marked, Evelyn said. The question is whether that marking spreads or stays isolated. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Evelyn dressed in her best remaining dress, dark blue with black trim, appropriate without being ostentatious, and helped prepare food for however many guests might actually appear. She'd made 3 kinds of bread, a massive pot of stew, and a dried apple pie that probably wouldn't win prizes but was edible. The Crawfords arrived first, a middle-aged couple with weathered faces and kind eyes. Their ranch bordered the Millers to the west. Mrs. Madigan, Mrs. Crawford said, I'm Louise. This is my husband, James. We wanted to thank you for taking in Ben and his little ones. It's a partnership, not charity, Evelyn replied, echoing Colt's framing. Still, it's a good thing you're doing. The Johnsons came next, younger couple, newer to the territory, clearly nervous about being there at all. Then, surprisingly, 2 more families Colt hadn't expected, the Palmers and the Wexlers, both running smaller operations on the eastern edges of the territory. By the time they sat down to eat, there were 16 people crowded around tables pulled together in the main room. The conversation was careful at first, polite, dancing around the real reason they were all there. It was Mrs. Palmer who broke the tension. Our well went bad last month, she said suddenly, into a lull in conversation. Water turned foul overnight, had to dig a new one 20 yards away, cost us $100 we didn't have. The room went quiet. Ours lost 3 calves in 1 week back in March, Mr. Johnson said. No clear cause, vet couldn't explain it. We've had fences cut, James Crawford added, 3 times in the last 4 months. One by one they shared incidents, small things, individually explainable, but laid out together forming a pattern that was unmistakable. Evelyn listened, taking mental notes, watching Colt's expression grow grimmer with each story. Did anyone report these to the sheriff? She asked. Heads shook. What's the point? Palmer said. Harding works for Rourke. Everyone knows it. But knowing it and proving it are different things, Evelyn said. But if you all documented what you've experienced, dates, damages, witnesses, that creates a record that exists independently of the sheriff. A record for what purpose? Louise Crawford asked. For when the territorial marshal makes his rounds, for when a circuit judge arrives, for when someone with actual authority asks questions. That could be months away, Wexler said. Then we document for months. But at least we'll have evidence instead of just stories. And in the meantime, what? Palmer's voice rose. We just keep losing stock, losing water, losing money while we wait for justice that might never come? No, Colt said. In the meantime, we watch each other's backs, share information. If someone sees suspicious activity on their property, they notify the rest of us. We create a network that makes it harder for Rourke to isolate targets. That's asking us to paint targets on ourselves, Johnson said. You already have targets on you, Evelyn replied. You just haven't acknowledged it yet. Ben Miller didn't think he was a target either, until his house burned down with his children inside. The bluntness of it silenced objections. What exactly are you proposing? James Crawford asked. Colt outlined it. Information sharing, mutual support, documented incidents, coordinated responses. Not an alliance, not a formal organization, just neighbors helping neighbors in a way that happened to make them all less vulnerable. And if Rourke retaliates? Mrs. Palmer asked quietly. Then we document that too, Evelyn said. And we make sure everyone knows that retaliation happened. Sunlight is the best disinfectant for corruption. The meeting broke up 2 hours later with cautious agreements to try the information sharing, to keep records, to watch for patterns. Not everyone committed, but enough did that it felt like progress. After the last guests left, Colt and Evelyn cleaned up in silence. You think it'll work? He asked finally. I think it's better than doing nothing. That's not the same as yes. No, she admitted. It's not, but it's what we have. He was quiet for a moment, drying dishes with methodical movements. You're good at this. Reading people, finding the angles that convince them. My father trained me well, even if he didn't mean to. Do you miss him? The question surprised her. Miss him? No, I don't think I ever really knew him well enough to miss. He was a force I lived around, not a person I had a relationship with. That sounds lonely. It was, but it taught me to be self-sufficient. Colt set down the dish he'd been drying. You don't have to be quite so self-sufficient now, just so you know. She looked at him. Meaning you've been here 2 weeks and you've thrown yourself into solving my problems, managing my household, organizing my neighbors. You're allowed to just exist sometimes, to have needs of your own. I have needs. I need purpose. I need to feel useful. I need to know I'm contributing something. You're contributing plenty, maybe too much. There's no such thing as too much when survival is at stake. And when survival isn't at stake, what then? Evelyn didn't have an answer to that. Survival had been the only calculation for so long that she'd stopped imagining alternatives. The next morning, everything changed. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke. She was dressed and downstairs in seconds. Colt was already there, along with Dutch and Shaw, all of them staring out the window at a sight that made her stomach drop. The eastern horizon was lit up orange against the pre-dawn darkness, not the sunrise. Fire. How far? Colt asked Dutch. Maybe 2 miles. Eastern section, near the creek. The grass? Yeah. The word carried weight Evelyn didn't fully understand until Colt swore viciously. Prairie fire, he said. If it reaches the creek and jumps it, we'll lose everything between here and the mountains. They were moving before he finished speaking, hands rousing, horses being saddled, every able body mobilizing. Ben's older boys grabbed tools without being asked. Even little Sarah was awake, standing on the porch with terrified eyes. Stay with her, Colt told Evelyn. Keep everyone who's not fighting the fire here, ready to evacuate if it gets close. I can help. You can help by making sure the children and non-essential people don't panic. That's more important. He was gone before she could argue, riding toward the flames with a dozen men behind him. Evelyn stood on that porch as the sky grew lighter and the smoke thickened, watching fire consume Colt's land mile by mile. The wind was blowing east to west, pushing the flames toward the ranch buildings. If it didn't slow, if they couldn't contain it, Maria arrived, brought by someone who'd ridden to town for supplies. She took one look at the situation and started organizing evacuation preparations without being asked. We pack essentials, she told Evelyn. Documents, valuables, food. Be ready to move if we must. They worked through the morning, watching the smoke, listening for hoofbeats that would signal retreat. Sarah clung to Evelyn's skirt, silent and shaking. It was nearly noon when they heard horses approaching, but it wasn't Colt and the hands returning. 3 riders came from the north, moving at a leisurely pace despite the fire raging to the east. They stopped in front of the house. The man in the center was tall, well-dressed for the frontier, with silver in his hair and eyes that assessed everything like he was calculating property values. Mrs. Madigan? He called. Silas Rourke. I believe we should talk. Evelyn's first thought was how ordinary he looked. After weeks of hearing Silas Rourke's name spoken like a curse, she'd expected someone visibly monstrous, scarred, cruel-faced, radiating obvious malice. Instead, the man sitting his horse in front of her porch could have been any successful businessman from Boston. Well-groomed, confident, the kind of man who'd smile while negotiating your ruin. The 2 riders flanking him were different. Younger, harder, with guns worn low and eyes that tracked movement like predators watching prey. Hired muscle dressed up as ranch hands. Maria appeared at Evelyn's elbow, her presence solid and steadying. Do not go near them, she whispered. But Evelyn was already stepping forward to the edge of the porch, keeping the rail between herself and the visitors. Sarah's hand slipped from her skirt as she moved. Mr. Rourke, she said, proud that her voice came out level. My husband is fighting the fire on our eastern section. If you're here to offer assistance, I'm sure he'd appreciate it. Rourke's smile was practiced, pleasant. Actually, Mrs. Madigan, I'm here to offer something else entirely. May we speak privately? Anything you need to say can be said right here. I'd prefer not to conduct business in front of an audience. His eyes flicked to Maria, to Sarah still standing behind Evelyn, dismissive. Surely you have somewhere we could talk as civilized people. I find the porch perfectly civilized. Something flickered in his expression. Irritation, maybe, that she wasn't cooperating with the script he'd written. Very well, I'll be direct. That fire currently consuming your husband's grassland started on my property this morning. An accident, of course. Lightning strike, we think, though the sky was clear. These things happen. How unfortunate, Evelyn said flatly. Indeed. Now the fire has already burned through approximately 500 acres of prime grazing land between my eastern boundary and your creek. The wind is pushing it west toward your buildings. Your husband and his men are attempting to create fire breaks, but I'm afraid the situation is rather dire. He paused, waiting for her to react. She didn't give him the satisfaction. However, he continued, I have 20 men currently idle on my property, equipment, resources. I could have them here within the hour to assist with containment. In exchange for what? His smile widened. You're as sharp as I'd heard. Yes, in exchange, specifically for water rights to that creek that runs through your eastern section. Permanent access, legally documented, transferable to future property owners. Evelyn's mind raced. The creek was their primary water source for the eastern grazing lands. Without it, that entire section became significantly less valuable. With it, Rourke could control water access to 3 neighboring properties, including what remained of Ben Miller's ranch. Those rights aren't mine to negotiate, she said. You'll need to speak with my husband. Your husband is currently watching his land burn while his cattle scatter. I imagine he's somewhat preoccupied. You, however, are here. And unless I'm mistaken about Eastern marriage laws, you have the legal authority to make binding agreements in his absence. You're mistaken. The creek rights are held jointly. Any transfer requires both signatures. It was a lie, but a plausible one. Rourke's expression hardened slightly. Mrs. Madigan, let me be clear about the situation. That fire will reach your buildings within 3 hours at its current rate of spread. Your husband doesn't have enough men to stop it. I do. But my men don't work for free, and I don't offer assistance without appropriate compensation. You're extorting us during a crisis you probably caused. I'm offering a business proposition during an unfortunate natural disaster. There's a difference. Only in how you phrase it. One of his men shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his gun. Rourke made a small gesture, and the man stilled. You're new to Montana, Mrs. Madigan. You don't understand how things work here yet. So let me educate you. Your husband has been resistant to reasonable offers, has been interfering with my legitimate business interests, and has now taken in Ben Miller despite knowing that Miller's property was under negotiation. These are not the actions of a good neighbor. And burning down Miller's house? Was that good neighboring? I had nothing to do with that tragic accident. The sheriff's report was quite clear. The sheriff works for you. Rourke's smile vanished. You should be careful making accusations you can't prove, Mrs. Madigan. Slander is a serious offense, even out here. Behind Evelyn, Maria muttered something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer or a curse. Sarah had started crying quietly. Evelyn forced herself to think past the fear, past the anger, to see the situation clearly. Rourke had come here personally, which meant this mattered to him. He'd brought muscle, which meant he'd anticipated resistance. But he was still trying to negotiate rather than simply taking what he wanted, which meant he had limits, legal constraints, or political ones, or simply the knowledge that outright violence would bring consequences even he couldn't avoid. That gave her leverage. Not much, but some. Here's my counteroffer, she said. You send your men to help fight the fire. No conditions. In exchange, I won't ride to Stillwater right now and tell everyone in town that you refuse to help your neighbors during a crisis while their land burned. I won't mention to the territorial authorities when they eventually arrive that you demanded water rights as payment for basic human decency. And I won't make sure every rancher within 50 miles knows exactly what kind of man you are. Rourke stared at her. You're threatening me? I'm explaining consequences. You understand those, I'm sure. You have no authority here, no connections, no influence. You're a stranger who arrived 3 weeks ago to marry a struggling rancher. What makes you think anyone would listen to you? Because I spent Sunday entertaining 16 people in this house. 16 ranchers and their families who are very interested in sharing information about suspicious incidents on their properties, who are starting to notice patterns, who are beginning to understand that their individual problems might be part of a larger strategy. Do you really want me adding refuse to help during a prairie fire to that conversation? The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of the fire and Sarah's muffled sobbing. Rourke's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Possibly, but I'd rather make mistakes on my own terms than accept deals on yours. He gathered his reins. When this ranch burns, remember that you had a chance to prevent it. When the territorial authorities investigate why it burned, I'll remember that you were here making threats instead of offering help. Rourke wheeled his horse around, his men following. They rode north at a canter, leaving dust hanging in the air. Evelyn's legs were shaking. She gripped the porch rail hard enough that her knuckles went white. Maria came up beside her. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Evelyn's voice wasn't as steady now. Maria, I need you to do something. Ride to the Crawford Ranch. It's closest. Tell them what happened. Tell them Rourke refused to help with the fire unless we gave him water rights. Make sure they know. And make sure they tell others. You want people to know he was here? I want witnesses. I want it established that he had the resources to help and chose not to, that he made demands during a crisis. She turned to look at Maria. Can you do that? Yes, but you should not be alone here if he comes back. I won't be alone. Ben's boys are in the barn, and I have this. Evelyn pulled back her shawl to show the small pistol she'd taken from Colt's desk drawer while packing evacuation supplies. I don't know if I can actually hit anything with it, but I can make noise. Maria looked at her with something like respect. You are not what anyone expected, Senora. Good. Expected is predictable, and predictable gets exploited. After Maria left, Evelyn went back inside where Sarah was still crying. She knelt down beside the girl. Sarah, honey, I need you to be brave for a little while longer. Can you do that? The girl nodded, hiccuping. Good. I need you to help me pack some things, just in case we need to leave quickly. Can you gather blankets and put them by the door? Giving the child a task seemed to calm her. She went off to collect blankets with the focus of someone grateful to have something concrete to do. Evelyn moved through the house, her mind cataloging priorities. Documents first, the ranch records, the incident log, the partnership agreement with Ben. Then valuables that couldn't be replaced. Then practical supplies. She worked methodically, pushing down panic, focusing on the next task, and then the next. She was carrying an armload of ledgers to the wagon when she heard hoofbeats again. Her hand went to the pistol in her pocket before she recognized Colt's bay gelding. He was riding hard, his clothes black with soot, his face streaked and exhausted. Dutch and Tom were with him. Evelyn ran to meet them. The fire. We've got it contained for now, Colt said, dismounting heavily. Cut a break along the creek, burned out a section ahead of it. If the wind doesn't shift, the buildings are safe. If it does... He noticed the wagon, the supplies piled near it. You're packing to evacuate. I'm preparing for the possibility. Rourke was here. Colt went very still. When? About 2 hours ago. He offered to help fight the fire in exchange for permanent water rights to the creek. And you said? I told him to go to hell, more politely, but the message was clear. Colt closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, his expression was complicated. Anger, worry, and something that might have been pride. Evelyn, that was necessary. He was testing us, seeing if we'd panic and make bad deals under pressure. I couldn't let him think that strategy would work. He could have forced the issue. 3 men, and you were here alone with Maria and the kids. He could have, but he didn't. That tells me something. What? That he still thinks he needs plausible deniability. That he's worried about witnesses, about how things look, which means he's not invincible. She paused. I sent Maria to spread word about what happened. By tonight, every rancher who was here Sunday will know Rourke refused to help during the fire. Dutch whistled low. That's going to make him furious. Good. Angry people make mistakes. Colt looked at her for a long moment, and she couldn't quite read his expression. Then he turned to Dutch. Get the men fed and rested. We'll need to keep watches on the fire line tonight in case it flares up. Yes, sir. After Dutch left, Colt walked to the edge of the porch, staring out at the smoke still visible on the eastern horizon. Evelyn joined him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "If I made things worse—" "You didn't. You called his bluff, which is more than I've managed in 6 months of dealing with him." He rubbed his face, leaving soot streaks. "I keep thinking I should be angry that you put yourself at risk like that, but mostly I'm just impressed." "Don't be too impressed. I was terrified the entire time. Couldn't tell. That's the only useful thing my father taught me, how to hide fear well enough that people think you're confident. There's a difference between hiding fear and being reckless." "I know, I was right on the edge of that line." They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun move toward the mountains, the smoke thinning as the afternoon wore on. "The fire was deliberately set," Colt said finally. "We found evidence at the point of origin. Oil-soaked rags, burn patterns that don't match lightning or natural causes. It started on Rourke's property, but just barely. Close enough to the boundary that it would spread to our land within an hour." "Can you prove it was his men?" "Not definitively. But the timing is interesting. Starts early morning, when his men would know we'd be spread thin, not enough hands to fight it properly. Then he shows up here right when the situation looks most desperate, offering help for a price. Extortion by arson. That'd be the charge if we could prove it, which we can't." Evelyn thought about the ledger inside, the growing documentation of incidents. Add it to the record anyway. Date, time, location, evidence found. Even if we can't prove it now, patterns become proof eventually. If we survive long enough to present them. We will. We're adapting, building alliances, making him work harder for each victory. That's more than most people do. Colt turned to look at her. "You keep saying we. You've been here 3 weeks. You could ask me to take you back east, get you away from all this. I'd understand." "Would you? Take me back east?" He hesitated. "If you really wanted it, yes. The marriage was your father's arrangement, not your choice. If you hate it here, I don't hate it here. Even with Rourke and the fires and the constant threats? Especially with those things, because at least here I get to fight back. Back east, I was just my father's problem to solve, a piece he moved around for his benefit. Here." She stopped, trying to find words for something she barely understood herself. "Here I matter. What I think, what I do, it affects outcomes. That's worth fighting for." Something shifted in Colt's expression. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek where soot had smudged. His hand was rough, warm, steady. "You matter," he said quietly. "Threats or no threats, you matter." The moment stretched between them, different from anything that had come before. Not the careful distance of strangers, not the practical partnership of business associates, but something else, something that made Evelyn's breath catch. Then Sarah called from inside, something about blankets falling over, and the moment broke. Colt's hand dropped. "I should check on the men, make sure everyone's accounted for. I should finish the evacuation preparations in case we need them." They moved apart, back to their separate tasks, but something had shifted. Evelyn felt it like a physical change in the air pressure. That night, with the fire reduced to a controlled burn along the eastern breaks and watches posted, Evelyn lay in her bed unable to sleep. Through her window, she could see the orange glow on the horizon, could smell smoke in every breath. Somewhere out there, Colt was taking his turn on watch, making sure the flames didn't reignite and spread. She thought about Rourke's face when she'd refused his offer. The flash of anger, quickly controlled. The calculated threat in his final words. A man like that didn't accept defiance gracefully. He'd retaliate, find some new pressure point, escalate in ways she couldn't fully predict. But they'd survived today. The fire was contained, the buildings were safe, and word was spreading that Rourke had refused to help neighbors in crisis. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Evelyn finally fell asleep sometime after midnight and dreamed of fire and water, and a man's hand steady against her cheek. The next week brought new tensions. The fire damage to the eastern section was extensive. Nearly 800 acres of grazing land burned black, fences destroyed, water sources contaminated with ash. Colt and the hands worked 16-hour days trying to assess the damage and plan recovery. Ben's cattle had to be moved to different pastures, crowding the remaining good land. Feed costs went up, tempers ran short, and Rourke was quiet. Too quiet. He's planning something, Dutch said over dinner 3 days after the fire. Man doesn't get told no and just accept it. Maybe the word spreading about his refusal to help made him cautious, Tom suggested. Shaw shook his head. Rourke doesn't do cautious. He does calculated. Difference is intent. Evelyn had been thinking the same thing. The silence felt like the pause before a storm, that eerie stillness when the air pressure drops and birds stop singing. On the 8th day, the sheriff arrived. Thomas Harding rode up to the ranch mid-morning, his badge catching sunlight, his expression professionally neutral. Evelyn watched from the kitchen window as Colt went out to meet him. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read body language, Harding showing papers, Colt's shoulders going rigid, raised voices. Then Colt turning toward the house, his face dark with anger. He came inside, Harding following. Evelyn, the sheriff has something to tell us. Harding removed his hat. Mrs. Madigan, I'm here on official business. There's been a complaint filed against your husband regarding the fire that occurred on the eastern section last week. A complaint from whom? Evelyn asked, though she already knew. Silas Rourke. He's alleging that the fire started on your property due to negligent maintenance of equipment, and that it spread onto his land, causing significant damage. He's demanding compensation for lost grazing land and requesting an official investigation into fire safety practices on this ranch. The audacity of it stole Evelyn's breath. The fire started on his property. We have evidence. Mr. Rourke has witnesses stating otherwise. He also has documentation of previous complaints about fire safety at this location. Harding pulled out papers. I need to conduct an inspection of your property and equipment. It's standard procedure. This is retaliation, Colt said flatly. He tried to extort us during the crisis. We refused, so now he's using the law against us. I'm just doing my job, Mr. Madigan. If you have evidence contradicting Mr. Rourke's claims, you're welcome to present it. We found oil-soaked rags at the fire's origin point, on his land, evidence of deliberate arson. Did you preserve that evidence? Colt hesitated. We were too busy fighting the fire to think about, then it's your word against his. And he has documentation. Harding's expression was almost apologetic. I don't make the laws. I just enforce them. Now, I can do this inspection cooperatively, or I can come back with a territorial order. Your choice. Evelyn watched Colt's hands curl into fists. Every instinct was probably telling him to refuse, to throw Harding off his property, to meet this corruption with force. But that was exactly what Rourke wanted, an excuse to escalate, to bring in territorial authorities with claims of obstruction. Do the inspection, Evelyn said quickly. We have nothing to hide. Colt turned to her, surprised. We don't, she repeated, holding his gaze. Our equipment is properly maintained, our fire safety practices are sound. Let him look. Let him write his report. It'll show we're cooperating with legal processes. Harding looked between them. That's sensible, Mrs. Madigan. It took 2 hours. Harding examined their equipment, walked the property, took notes. The hands followed at a distance, watching, making sure nothing was planted or tampered with. Evelyn stayed close to Harding the entire time, asking questions, establishing herself as a witness to the process. You're very thorough, Harding said at one point. I believe in documentation. It prevents misunderstandings or creates legal complications. Only if someone's trying to hide something. He glanced at her. You're not what I expected. So I keep hearing. When he finally left, promising to file his report within the week, Colt looked exhausted. That accomplished nothing except giving Rourke ammunition for whatever he's planning next, he said. It accomplished establishing that we cooperate with legal processes while he makes false accusations, Evelyn countered. When this eventually reaches someone with actual authority, if it reaches someone, the circuit judge isn't due for 2 more months. Then we have 2 months to build our case. Colt sank into a chair. You keep acting like this is a legal battle we can win. But the law out here is whoever has the most money and guns. Rourke has both. He has advantages. That's not the same as having already won. You're so sure of that. I have to be. The alternative is giving up, and I don't know how to do that. That night, Evelyn was in the office corner going through supply orders when she heard a horse approach. She looked out to see one of the Crawford ranch hands, a young man named Peter, riding hard. She opened the door before he could knock. "What's wrong?" "Mrs. Madigan, Mrs. Crawford sent me. There's men at the creek on Rourke's land, building something. She thought you should know." Colt appeared behind Evelyn, still dressed from his watch shift. "What kind of something?" "Looks like a dam, rocks and timber blocking the flow." Colt swore viciously and was moving before Evelyn could process it. "Dutch! Shaw, get the horses!" "I'm coming," Evelyn said. "No, you're staying here where it's safe." "Safe from what? He's not at the creek, he's—" But Colt was already mounting up, the hands following. They rode out into the darkness, leaving Evelyn standing in the doorway, with Peter looking uncomfortable beside her. "Should I go back to the Crawfords?" he asked. "Yes. Tell Mrs. Crawford thank you for the warning, and tell her if she hears anything, gunshots, shouting, to send someone to Stillwater for the territorial marshal." "That's 2 days hard riding." "I know. Do it anyway." After he left, Evelyn paced the main room, too anxious to sit. Building a dam on the creek was exactly the escalation she'd feared. Legal enough that Rourke could claim he was making improvements on his own property, damaging enough that it would cripple the ranches downstream. And if Colt confronted him about it, if there was violence, that was what Rourke wanted. Provoke a response that looked like aggression, claim self-defense, use it as justification for whatever came next. Evelyn grabbed the pistol from the desk drawer, checked that it was loaded, and went back to the porch. If Rourke's men were at the creek, that meant they weren't here. But that didn't mean they wouldn't come. She waited, watching the darkness, listening for hoofbeats. They came 2 hours later, Colt and the hands riding back looking frustrated and angry. "He's got 15 men working on it," Colt said, dismounting. 15 armed men, in the middle of the night, blocking the creek with a structure big enough to cut our water flow by half. "Did you tear it down?" "We tried. They drew guns, said we were trespassing on Rourke's property, destroying his legal improvements. If we'd pushed it, there would have been shooting." "Which is exactly what he wanted." "I know. That's the only reason we backed down." He looked at her. "This is it. The final move before he forces us out. Without that water, the eastern section is worthless. We can't graze cattle there through summer. We'd have to sell the land or watch it become wasteland." Evelyn's mind raced through options, strategies, alternatives. What if we reroute the water, dig channels, create new flow patterns? That would take weeks and more money than we have. Then we go legal, file a complaint about water rights violations. With who? The sheriff who works for Rourke? The territorial authorities who won't arrive for months? With everyone. We document it, we spread the word, we make sure every rancher in the territory knows what he's doing. We turn this from an isolated incident into a pattern of behavior that threatens everyone. Colt looked at her like she was suggesting they could hold back the tide with their bare hands. "And then what? We wait while he chokes off our water and drives us into bankruptcy?" "No, then we make him an offer he didn't expect." "What offer?" The idea was forming as she spoke, risky but possible. The one thing he wants more than this land: access to political legitimacy. He's planning to run for territorial legislature, right? That requires votes, support, a reputation as a reasonable businessman rather than a ruthless land grabber. So we offer him a public compromise, controlled water sharing, documented and witnessed, in exchange for verified improvements to the dam structure that benefit all downstream users. Make it look like cooperation, like he's being generous and civic-minded. Why would he accept that when he can just take what he wants? Because we present it in front of witnesses, at a public gathering, where refusing would make him look like exactly what he is, a tyrant who values control over community benefit, and accepting would force him into a legal agreement that limits his ability to manipulate water access in the future. Dutch, who'd been listening, spoke up. "That's risky. If it doesn't work, we're no worse off than we are now," Evelyn said. "But if it does, we turn his own political ambitions against him." Colt stared at her. "You really think like this all the time? Seeing angles, finding leverage?" "It's the only way I know how to survive powerful men who think they own everything." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. It was tired, strained, but genuine. "All right," he said. Let's try it your way. But if this goes wrong, it won't. You can't know that. No, Evelyn admitted. But I can stack the odds, and I'm very good at that. The next morning, Evelyn rode into Stillwater with Colt and Dutch flanking her. The town looked the same as it had a month ago when she'd first arrived. Weathered buildings, dusty streets, people moving through their lives with the tired persistence of those who'd learned not to expect much. But now she understood the currents beneath the surface, the power structures that determined who survived and who didn't. They stopped first at the newspaper office, a cramped building with a printing press visible through the window. The editor was a man named Garrett, thin as a rail with ink-stained fingers and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Madigan," he said when they entered, "I've been hearing interesting things about you. Good things, I hope." "Interesting is better than good. Good is boring." He gestured to chairs that didn't match. "What can I do for you?" Evelyn laid out her proposal clearly, watching his face for reactions. A public meeting, advertised in the newspaper, to discuss water management and community cooperation. Open to all ranchers, businessmen, and concerned citizens. Hosted at the Madigan Ranch in 3 days. "And you think Rourke will come?" Garrett asked. "I think if we announce it publicly, if we make it about community welfare and responsible resource management, he'll have to come. Or look like he's avoiding public accountability." "That's clever. Also risky. What if he shows up and just refuses your proposal in front of everyone? Then everyone sees him refuse, sees him choose personal gain over community benefit, right before he's planning to run for territorial legislature." Garrett leaned back, studying her. "You're trying to put him in a box where every option costs him something." "That's exactly what I'm doing." "I like it. I'll run the announcement, front page, tomorrow's edition." He paused. "You know this might not work." "I know, but doing nothing definitely doesn't work." They left the newspaper office and made their way through town, stopping at businesses, talking to people, spreading word of the meeting. Some were supportive, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. The general store owner, clearly in Rourke's pocket, told them to leave his establishment. The blacksmith, an old man named Sullivan, whose daughter had left the territory years ago, gripped Evelyn's hand hard and said, "Give him hell, ma'am." By afternoon, half the town knew about the meeting. By evening, the other half would too. They were heading back to the horses when Sheriff Harding intercepted them outside the saloon. "Mr. Madigan, Mrs. Madigan." His expression was unreadable. "I heard about your public meeting." "It's open to everyone, Sheriff," Colt said carefully, "including you." "I'm sure it is. I'm also sure Mr. Rourke is going to have thoughts about it." "Mr. Rourke is welcome to share those thoughts at the meeting," Evelyn said, "in front of witnesses, where everything said is on the record." Harding's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile, might have been something else. "You've got nerve, I'll give you that. Just make sure your nerve doesn't get you hurt." "Is that a warning, Sheriff?" "It's an observation. This territory has a way of teaching hard lessons to people who push too far. And it has a way of rewarding people who stand up to bullies," Evelyn replied. "I guess we'll see which lesson applies." They rode back to the ranch in tense silence. Colt kept glancing at her like he was trying to figure out whether she was brave or crazy. "What?" she finally asked. "You just backed the sheriff into a corner where he either has to admit he works for Rourke or pretend to be impartial. Neither option is comfortable for him." "Good. Comfortable people don't change. Uncomfortable ones have to pick sides. And if he picks Rourke, then we know for certain what we already suspected. Knowledge is useful." That evening, Evelyn worked on the presentation she'd give at the meeting. Facts, figures, water usage data, evidence of Rourke's dam construction, and its downstream impact. She organized it like one of her father's business proposals, clear, logical, building to an inevitable conclusion. Maria found her still writing past midnight. "You should rest," Maria said. "You will need strength for what comes. I need this to be perfect more than I need sleep. Nothing is perfect. You do your best and then you trust it will be enough." Evelyn set down her pen. "What if it's not enough? What if he just—" "Then you tried. That is more than most people do." Maria sat across from her. "My daughter, the one who left after what happened with Rourke's men, she writes to me sometimes, from San Francisco, where she is safe. In her last letter, she said she wished someone had fought for her, had stood up, had made noise instead of accepting that powerful men can do whatever they want. I'm sorry that happened to her. I am too, but you are doing what I could not do, what her father could not do. You are making noise. You are fighting. Maria reached across and squeezed Evelyn's hand. Whatever happens, that matters. The next 2 days were chaos. Word of the meeting spread faster than the prairie fire had, carried by riders between ranches, discussed in town, debated over dinner tables across the territory. Some ranchers committed to attending. Others sent word they wanted nothing to do with it. A few offered quiet support but said they couldn't be seen taking sides. On the evening before the meeting, Ben Miller found Evelyn in the kitchen preparing food for the next day's gathering. I wanted to thank you, he said, for everything you've done, for my family, for the partnership, for this fight you're taking on. It's not charity, Ben, it's strategy. Maybe, but it's also courage. And I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, you've already changed things. People are talking, asking questions, connecting incidents they thought were isolated. That's because of you. Evelyn felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. I just hope it's enough. So do I, but if it's not, he hesitated. If things go wrong tomorrow, if Rourke brings men and it turns violent, you get yourself and the kids out. Don't try to be a hero. I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to survive. There's a difference. That night, lying in bed, unable to sleep, Evelyn heard footsteps on the stairs. A soft knock on her door. It's me, Colt's voice. She got up, wrapped a shawl around her nightdress, and opened the door. He stood in the hallway looking uncertain, which was strange on a man who usually moved with complete confidence. I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about tomorrow. Me too. Can I? He gestured vaguely. Can we talk? She stepped back, letting him into her room. He moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, about how back east you were just a piece your father moved around, how out here you matter. Yes? You matter to me. Not just because you're smart or strategic or useful. You matter because… He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. Because in 1 month, you've become essential to everything. To how I think, how I plan, how I face what's coming. And if something happens tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. You can't know that. If Rourke brings armed men, if this goes wrong, if… Evelyn crossed to him, put her hand on his arm. Colt, look at me. He did. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's the deal. That's what partnership means. This isn't what you signed up for. The marriage contract didn't include range wars and arson and public confrontations with dangerous men. No, it included being sold off to solve my father's problems and spending my life as a frontier wife with no say in anything. This… She gestured to encompass the ranch, the situation, the fight. This is better, even with the danger, because I get to choose. Colt reached up, covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. After tomorrow, if we survive this, when we survive this, he corrected, almost smiling, maybe we could renegotiate the separate rooms situation. Evelyn's breath caught. That's a terrible proposal. I know. I've never been good at words. Try again. He turned to face her fully, both hands now holding hers. Evelyn Carter Madigan, you're the smartest, bravest, most aggravating person I've ever met. You've been here 5 weeks and you've turned my entire life upside down. I didn't expect to feel this way about someone I married through a contract, but I do. And I'd like the chance to see where that goes, if you want it to. That's better, she said softly. And yes, I want it too. The kiss was tentative at first, testing, and then less tentative. His hands were gentle on her face, in her hair. She could taste smoke and coffee and something else, something that felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Colt rested his forehead against hers. After tomorrow, he said again. After tomorrow, she agreed. He left, and Evelyn lay back down in a bed that suddenly felt too empty. But for the first time since arriving in Montana, she fell asleep, smiling. The morning of the meeting dawned clear and bright, which felt almost offensive given the tension crackling through the ranch. By noon, wagons and riders had been arriving for an hour. The Crawfords, the Palmers, the Johnsons, the Wexlers. Other ranchers Evelyn had never met. Townspeople from Stillwater, curious or supportive, or just wanting to witness whatever was about to happen. By her count, nearly 40 people had gathered, and no sign of Rourke. "He's not coming," Dutch muttered, standing beside her on the porch. "He's going to ignore this completely." "Give him time," Evelyn said, with more confidence than she felt. "He'll want to see who showed up first, want to assess the situation before committing." At 1 o'clock, she was about to start without him when the sound of multiple horses carried across the grassland. A group of riders approached from the north, 10 men, all armed, with Silas Rourke in the lead. "Showtime," Shaw said quietly. Rourke dismounted with theatrical precision, his men forming a loose semicircle behind him. He removed his hat, smiled at the assembled crowd like he was greeting constituents. "Mrs. Madigan," he called, "I received your invitation, though I must say, announcing a public meeting in the newspaper is an unusual way to discuss private business matters." "This isn't private business, Mr. Rourke. This is community welfare. Water access affects everyone here." "Indeed it does, which is why responsible landowners make necessary improvements to ensure efficient distribution. Improvements that cut downstream flow by half aren't improvements. They're sabotage." A murmur went through the crowd. Rourke's smile didn't waver. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Madigan. Do you have evidence to support it?" Evelyn pulled out the water flow measurements Colt and the hands had taken, the calculations showing exactly how much the dam had reduced access. She held them up for everyone to see. "I have data, witnessed, documented, measured over the past week. Your dam has reduced water flow to 3 downstream properties by 47%. During the dry season, that's the difference between survival and bankruptcy for the ranches affected. And I have engineering reports showing my improvements actually regulate flow more efficiently, preventing flooding and waste." Rourke produced his own papers. "Perhaps your measurements are simply inaccurate. Perhaps your engineering reports are fabricated to justify theft." The crowd went quiet. Accusing a man like Rourke of theft in public was dangerous, possibly suicidal. Evelyn could feel Colt tense beside her. Rourke's smile finally slipped. "You should be very careful, Mrs. Madigan. Slander is a serious offense. So is water rights violation, so is arson, so is extortion during a crisis." She turned to address the crowd directly, raising her voice. "A week ago, while a prairie fire threatened this ranch, and the men here were fighting to contain it, Mr. Rourke came to my door. He offered to help, for a price. Permanent water rights to our creek section. When I refused, he left us to fight the fire alone, with his men and equipment sitting idle." People shifted, murmured. Louise Crawford called out, "Is that true, Silas?" "I made a business proposal during an unfortunate situation. That's hardly a crime." "No, but it's telling," Evelyn continued. "Just like it's telling that Ben Miller's house burned down under suspicious circumstances, that fences get cut on multiple properties, that wells go bad, that cattle die without clear cause. Individually, these seem like accidents. Together, they're a pattern. A strategy designed to force ranchers into desperate situations where they have no choice but to sell to you at a fraction of fair value." "You're describing conspiracy theories built on coincidence," Rourke said, but his voice had an edge now. "Ranching is a difficult business. Accidents happen." "Do they?" Evelyn pulled out the incident log, the documentation she and Colt had been keeping. "I have records here of 17 separate incidents across 8 properties over the past 6 months. All affecting ranchers who refused to sell to you, all investigated by a sheriff who works on your payroll, all declared accidents with no further action taken." She handed the log to Garrett, the newspaper editor. "Please examine this. Share it with anyone who wants to verify the pattern." Rourke's expression had gone cold. "You're making serious accusations without proof. Correlation isn't causation." "You're right, which is why I'm not accusing you of anything illegal." Evelyn took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm simply proposing a solution that benefits everyone. A water-sharing agreement, publicly documented and legally binding, that guarantees fair access to all downstream properties. You modify your dam to allow regulated flow that serves community needs. We acknowledge your rights to make improvements on your property, and everyone gets certainty instead of conflict." And why would I agree to that when I'm already well within my rights to manage my property as I see fit? Because you're planning to run for territorial legislature. Because that requires votes from the people standing here right now. Because a man who's seen as working for community benefit has a much easier path to political office than one who's known for crushing his neighbors. She paused. You can win this fight through intimidation and legal manipulation, but you'll lose the legitimacy you need for larger ambitions. Is this ranch really worth that cost? Rourke stared at her, and Evelyn could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing options, assessing risks, measuring costs against benefits. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Then Sheriff Harding spoke up from the edge of the crowd. Mr. Rourke, if I could offer a thought, having a public water agreement would actually strengthen your legal position for future development. Shows you as a good neighbor, willing to work with community. Looks good for someone in political life. Evelyn hadn't expected support from that quarter. She glanced at Harding, saw something in his expression that might have been respect or might have been relief that someone else was finally standing up. Rourke looked at the crowd, at the 40-plus people watching him, waiting to see what kind of man he really was. I'll consider your proposal, he said finally, but I'll need to review the specific terms with my lawyers before committing to anything. Of course, Evelyn said. We can arrange a formal meeting to discuss details, with witnesses present and everything documented. Fine. My lawyers will contact you within the week. He turned to his men. We're leaving. They mounted and rode out, and Evelyn felt her legs go weak with relief. She'd done it. Not perfectly, not completely, but she'd forced Rourke into a position where refusing would cost him more than accepting, where the path of least resistance was cooperation rather than destruction. The crowd erupted into conversation, people gathering in small groups, discussing what they'd witnessed. Several ranchers approached Evelyn to shake her hand, offer support, share their own stories of incidents they'd thought were isolated. Garrett found her as the gathering was breaking up. Hell of a performance, Mrs. Madigan. You just backed Silas Rourke into a corner in front of half the territory. Will he honor the agreement? If he wants political legitimacy, he'll have to. Otherwise, everyone here becomes a witness to him breaking his word. Garrett grinned. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the craziest, possibly both. I prefer strategic. After everyone left, after the cleanup was done and the ranch had settled into evening quiet, Evelyn stood on the porch watching the sun set. Colt came up beside her, handed her a cup of coffee. You did it, he said. We don't know if he'll follow through yet. He will. You gave him a way to save face while losing power. That's the kind of deal smart people take. And if he's not smart, then we document the breach and we fight the next battle. But I think you read him correctly. He wants political power more than he wants this specific land. Colt was quiet for a moment. How did you learn to do that? To see what people want and use it as leverage? My father. He was brilliant at understanding motivations, at finding pressure points. He just used it for selfish purposes. I'm trying to use the same skills differently. You're succeeding. They stood in comfortable silence, watching darkness creep across the grassland. About last night, Colt said eventually, what I said was perfect. No revisions needed. So after all this settles, assuming we're both still alive, we renegotiate the sleeping arrangements. Yes, I remember. Good. He took her hand. Because I'm terrible at this, but I'd like to try. Being married to you for real, not just on paper. I'd like that too. The lawyers came the following week. They spent 3 days negotiating water rights agreements, usage schedules, measurement protocols, penalty clauses for violations. Rourke tried to insert loopholes. Evelyn caught them. They renegotiated. By the end, they had a document that actually accomplished what she'd proposed. Regulated water access that served all downstream properties while acknowledging Rourke's rights to his improvements. The signing happened in Stillwater, with Garrett and Sheriff Harding as witnesses. Rourke's expression was stiff, controlled anger barely contained. But he signed. This doesn't change anything fundamental, he told Evelyn as they were leaving. You've won a temporary concession. That's all. Temporary concessions that become permanent agreements are how civilizations get built, she replied. You should remember that when you're running for legislature. 2 weeks later, the territorial marshal arrived on his routine circuit. Evelyn presented him with the incident logs, the documentation of suspicious activities, witness statements from 8 different ranches. He listened, took notes, and promised to investigate. A month after that, the circuit judge held court in Stillwater. Rourke's lawyers presented arguments for dismissing all complaints as unfounded. Evelyn and Garrett presented the water agreement, the incident documentation, and testimony from affected ranchers. The judge ruled in favor of upholding the water agreement and ordered a formal investigation into the fire that destroyed Ben Miller's house. Nothing was proven definitively. No criminal charges were filed. But Rourke's reputation took damage he couldn't easily repair. His political ambitions stalled. His business practices were under scrutiny. And the ranchers who'd been isolated and afraid were now connected, watching each other's backs, sharing information. Small victories. But in Montana Territory in 1881, small victories were how you survived. By late summer, the eastern section of the Madigan Ranch was recovering. New grass grew through the burned scars, cattle grazed on land that had enough water to sustain them. Ben Miller had started rebuilding his house with help from neighboring ranchers who showed up unannounced with lumber and labor. His kids were thriving. Michael had started courting the Palmer daughter, James was learning blacksmithing from old Sullivan, and Sarah followed Evelyn around like a devoted shadow. The partnership between Colt and Ben had become permanent, formalized with proper legal documents and profit-sharing arrangements that benefited both families. Other ranchers had started forming similar cooperative agreements, sharing resources, coordinating purchases, creating the collective bargaining power Evelyn had suggested months ago. And Evelyn and Colt had renegotiated their sleeping arrangements. The second bedroom had become Evelyn's office, where she kept the ranch ledgers, the supply records, and the ongoing documentation of incidents that might still matter someday. She spent her days managing the household, the finances, the strategic planning that kept the ranch competitive and growing. Her nights belonged to a husband who'd stopped being a stranger and become a partner in every sense. On a cool September evening, 6 months after she'd arrived in Montana, Evelyn stood on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Maria was inside preparing dinner. Ben's kids were doing chores, the hands were finishing their day's work. Everything hummed with the organized chaos of a working ranch. Colt came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That my father sold me off thinking he was disposing of a problem, that he sent me here expecting I'd disappear into obscurity, married to some frontier rancher, never to bother him again. And I'm standing on 5,000 acres that I help manage, married to a man I actually love, having just restructured the economic relationships of 8 neighboring ranches and damaged the reputation of the most powerful man in the territory." She leaned back against him. "I should write him a thank you letter." Colt laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "You're terrifying. I hope you know that." "I'm effective. There's a difference." "Not much of one." They stood together as the light faded and the stars began appearing, those impossible Montana stars that still made Evelyn catch her breath with their abundance. She'd come to this territory with nothing but a trunk of practical dresses and a lifetime of her father's calculating lessons. She'd expected brutality, hardship, silent endurance. She'd been prepared to survive. Instead, she'd found purpose, partnership, power that came not from inheritance or manipulation, but from intelligence and courage and the willingness to stand up when standing up mattered. The frontier was still harsh. Winters would still be brutal. Rourke wasn't defeated, just contained. There would be new battles, new threats, new problems that needed solving. But Evelyn had learned something essential in these 6 months. She'd learned that survival wasn't enough. That the real victory wasn't just enduring, but reshaping the world around you into something better than what you were given. She'd been sold to the edge of the world, and she'd made it hers. "Dinner's ready," Maria called from inside. Evelyn turned from the view, from the vast Montana landscape that had become home, and followed Colt inside to a table full of people who'd become family. Not through blood or contracts, but through shared struggles and mutual support and the bonds forged in fire. The stranger who'd bought her had kept his promise. She'd been treated with respect, given her own space when needed, never forced into anything without her consent. But somewhere along the way, the marriage of convenience had become something else entirely. Something neither of them had planned, but both had chosen. That night, lying in bed with Colt's arm around her and the sound of the wind outside, Evelyn thought about the girl who'd stepped off that train 6 months ago. Scared, defensive, armored in practical dresses and hidden fear. That girl had been expecting to survive. This woman, the one who'd faced down Silas Rourke, who'd reorganized ranch economics, who'd turned isolation into alliance. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And in Montana territory, where only the toughest endured, that was the only victory that mattered.